Welcome to the Geekverse. I'm Heath. If you're enjoying the videos, please like, subscribe, and consider joining us for the Morning Grind live streams each day. Together, we can be a very positive and constructive force in the Geekverse. Now let's get to it. Let's take a look at the rules for inventory and encumbrance as they manifest in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, because I maintain that the particular implementation of encumbrance and inventory in 5th edition is one of the worst implementations of the system that I have found in a role-playing game. I know that a lot of people tend to just wing inventory and encumbrance or even ignore it altogether, and I don't blame them in many regards for that, because it seems like in a lot of role-playing games, encumbrance is very tedious to track, because if you're trying to track all of your weight by pounds, it's very tedious to do, and then what's the result of going through all of that tedium? Well, the result of all of that tedium is often just a negative and a penalty. You get to move slower, right? You become encumbered and you don't get to move as fast. Ideally, you might think that if someone's going to do a lot of work and spend a lot of time in trying to track information on a character sheet, they'd be rewarded for that. But here's a situation where spending a lot of time and effort updating weights that you're carrying pound by pound as you take off objects or you pick up new objects, well, all that gets you is a big penalty. And so players aren't inclined to do it. That takes time at the table. GMs don't enforce it. And I think that's a shame, because I think that if properly implemented, inventory and encumbrance systems are there to actually increase the amount of fun at the table. Now, how could they do that? They could do that if they were actually forcing the players to make critical and important choices about what resources their players are going to have available during an adventure in order to solve the problems and overcome the obstacles that they're presented with. I think that's what an inventory and encumbrance system is supposed to be doing, because you're not supposed to have everything available to you at all times, right? There's supposed to be some type of limit to the amount of stuff that you can carry. So why are we limiting that anyway? Presumably to force the players into interesting choices. But when the inventory and encumbrance system is badly designed, like I assert that it is in 5th edition, it doesn't facilitate that, it gets ignored, and any type of actual interest that system could have added to the game is just eliminated. So let's take a look at what 5th edition actually says about encumbrance. I'm in the SRD. It says carrying capacity. Your carrying capacity is your strength score multiplied by 15. This is the weight in pounds that you can carry, which is high enough that most characters don't usually have to worry about it. So what's wrong with that? Well, we've got all of the weights of all of our different equipment and armor and all of that in here, and so presumably that's supposed to be the limiting factor in how much stuff we're able to carry, because it's specifically telling us that we are using weight in pounds to put that restriction on the characters. Strength score multiplied by 15. So we're supposed to be tracking the amount that our equipment weighs by pound, and if we exceed this threshold, then I guess I can't carry anymore. But on the other hand, it says this is high enough that most characters usually don't have to worry about it. What? They don't have to worry about it? So this does two things wrong. First of all, we've got it in here that here's the limit. Strength times 15, weight in pounds. Here's the weight of all of your equipment and how much gold is, how much gold weighs, and how much your armor weighs, and how much your weapons weigh. Add all of that up. But what's the result of adding all that up? By the time you add all that up, you find out that, well, it's high enough that most characters usually don't have to worry about it. Which is not what we want, because if we are going to all the trouble of adding up all of our equipment pound by pound, we actually do want that to matter. At least in this case, it's not actively penalizing us. There's an optional rule down below for that, but you add all of that up and then you come to the conclusion, hey, the game's right. That's not really something that I'm supposed to worry about. So it fails from this perspective about, well, apparently you are expected to be tracking all of this. And I realize that some people track all this digitally now, but especially for those that are pen and paper, we're supposed to be tracking all of this, but we're supposed to be tracking it, and the result of tracking it is that it probably won't matter. That's not working mechanically, and it's also not enforcing the important choices. If it's so much, if our carrying threshold is so high that most characters don't have to worry about it, I mean, what does that mean? How much rations can I carry? How many torches can I carry? How many of the critical supplies, and I'm going to emphasize that, how many critical supplies or resources can I actually take with me and carry on this adventure that I'm going on, so that I know what I'm going to have to balance and what I'm going to have to manage during the entire adventure. So this just fails on both of those levels. Now, there is a variant encumbrance rule right here that says, the rules for lifting and carrying are intentionally simple. Here's a variant if you are looking for more detailed rules for determining how a character is hindered by the weight of equipment. When you use this variant, ignore the strength column of the armor table. It says, if you carry weight in excess of 5 times your strength score, you are encumbered, which means your strength score, which means your speed drops by 10 feet. If you carry weight in excess of 10 times your strength score up to a maximum carrying capacity, you are instead heavily encumbered, which means your speed drops by 20 feet and you have disadvantage on ability checks, attack rolls, saving throws that use strength, dexterity, and constitution. So under this variant rule, we're basically just adding in more complexity to penalize the players. Or add all of this up, we're increasing the number of different thresholds we have to keep track of, and then when you hit them, you get some type of penalty. I think that's at least better than saying, hey, add all of this stuff up, but hey, most of the time you're not going to have to worry about the result anyway. At least this does influence something. I suppose that the idea that this is going to be limiting on your resources to accomplish an adventure is supposed to be implicit, but it never says that. It never says that that's the purpose of this. I kind of get the feeling that this section was kind of added into 5th edition just because, hey, encumbrance and the amount stuff weighs, that was something that we did in 3rd edition and 2nd edition, like AD&D, and because we're trying to return to sort of a 3rd edition kind of feel after 4th edition, well, here's your stuff if you like, here's a paragraph on it if you like adding up the weights of all of your equipment. There you go, and we're done. Without a whole lot of thought about what that was actually supposed to facilitate in gameplay, and then implementing that system in a way that would actually increase the fun at the table. So that's why I think that it's an important part of it. If I'm designing an RPG like we're doing on Tuesdays, I definitely think that inventory and encumbrance has got to be something that you think about. You could do this in different levels of complexity in different games. There is certainly one way that you could say, here is the amount of stuff that you can carry, and you just can't carry any more than that. However you're going to calculate it, this is the amount of stuff that you can have with you. And then if you exceed that, well, you just can't. Here it is. If you want more complexity, you could say, now here is, light, or no encumbrance, encumbered, and then heavily encumbered, like Dungeons and Dragons does. And then there's going to be some penalties associated with it. But what's the advantage of that? There should be an advantage to offset those penalties. The advantage that's supposed to be there is that you should have more critical resources with which to accomplish your objectives. So then you actually have an interesting decision to make. Well, I can only take this much supplies with me, or this many supplies, and have no penalties, or I can take this and be better supplied and better equipped, which should give me advantages during the game, but I'm going to take the following disadvantages, right? So that could be there. So if you want more gradation, then you have those. But I'm not a big fan of just tracking everything pound by pound. I do find that that's too tedious. If that's what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to capture this particular element of gameplay, this resource management, the critical nature of supplies and so forth. I think there are better and easier ways to do that. Different RPG systems have come up with different ways to implement these systems, and I think those are important things to look at, and I think a great topic to talk about on the Morning Grind live streams. We've been talking about how to play different role-playing games and sort of focused on the mechanics specifically of action resolution and how a bunch of different role-playing games are doing that. But I think a dedicated topic needs to be, how do we actually effectively implement inventory and encumbrance into games? What different games should we look at that have specifically done encumbrance and inventory management well? What recommendations do you have? We've looked at some, but I would like to know what systems you think are actually doing this very well so that we can study and analyze those. So I'd love to know what you think. Do you use encumbrance and inventory in your games when you're playing 5th edition? Do you use the optional rules? Do you track things pound by pound? How exactly does your game master run the game? How do you prefer to run it? And what's the best system out there that you found in any role-playing game for encumbrance and inventory? Let me know down in the comments.